Well, thank you very much, Daryl, and thanks for the invitation to talk about NXDN, the basics, as well as some of the newer, more advanced features that we're going to be introducing to all of you today. And for those of you who all of this likely is going to slide by fairly fast, please make sure you come join us this afternoon at 1:30 in the room behind us, where we're going to drill down with programming software. We're also going to get involved with some of the ins and outs of the weather message texting app. So while we're going to be talking about all of this right now with our presentation, we're going to get down into the weeds this afternoon and show you the nitty-gritty behind all of it, so that you'll say, hey, not only was that great in the morning, but now I fully understand how to do all of this stuff and make some things happen on NXDN. And let's see here. There we go. Well, what's happening with NXDN here in West Central Florida? It's bigger, it's better, and we've still got some more things that we are going to be doing with the network, quite honestly, in the next couple of weeks, that will smooth out some of the bumps and bruises and the rough edges that we've dealt with over the course of the last year, growing pains, if you will. And we're going to be talking about how we're going to get some of that done today. It's also more robust in terms of what you can do with NXDN and where you can do it. And I think the best way to describe that last item, where you can do it, comes in line with our system map. You'll notice that there is at least one new repeater on the map, and that is in Arcadia in DeSoto County. DeSoto County, Hardee County have not been without NXDN, and in fact, we regularly have gotten check-ins from both counties through repeaters to the east, repeaters to the west, repeaters to the north or south. Both counties do have NXDN coverage, but if you happen to be in your house in a well-constructed building, which presents its own sets of challenges because it has to survive severe weather, hurricanes, the likes of Mitch and Helene that we had this last year, well, with a 5-watt portable radio and no outdoor antenna, that can be a bit of a challenge. So we have added a repeater in Arcadia on 443.4125, which fills in what I affectionately call the donut hole. So not only do we not have a donut hole in DeSoto County anymore, why, it's a cream-filled, chocolate-covered, glazed donut to really meet the needs of the people that are in DeSoto County, people who may be driving through DeSoto County. Another thing that we've introduced, not only with that repeater, and it's live right now, but it's also live on the Verna repeater, it's live on the Laurel repeater in Sarasota County, and it will soon be going live on the rest of the NI4CE NXDN repeaters in the next couple of weeks, is something we call beaconing. And we'll talk about why that's important and what the end product is for you as an end user. One of the other things that will likely be put in place in the next couple of weeks is something called a VPN, a virtual private network. What is a VPN, you ask? Well, it is essentially a network within a network, and hence the circle. A virtual private network is something that is put in place for security reasons, for throughput reasons, and instead of mixing it up with all of the other stuff that is out there on the internet, whether it's wired or wireless, and we have both instances with the wide area network that connects all of the NXDN repeaters. What the VPN does is it puts a nice encrypted wall around our traffic so that the folks that are poking and prodding and trying to break things, and unfortunately there's way too many of them, well, it's going to make it a whole lot more difficult for them to poke and prod and interrupt the stream that is required for good NXDN connectivity. You know, unlike the process of sending email or doing a file send or receive, or even looking at a website, NXDN is a streaming technology. In other words, the second packet has to follow the first packet, the third packet has to follow the second packet and the first packet, and if they get all scrambled up, well, it can cause retries, it can cause delays. In some cases, things just stop working. A VPN is going to go a long way towards making sure that the NXDN packets, which occur about every 80 milliseconds, wrap your head around that. A new packet every 80 milliseconds. Well, the VPN is going to go a long way towards making sure that that first packet is followed by the second packet, is followed by the third packet, and so on, and so on, and so on. So we'll be adding this to the network system-wide, likely in the next couple of weeks, and this is going to improve the throughput on the NXDN system. Some other improvements that we have implemented include more fiber optic connections at the repeater sites. You've got a couple of ways of connecting the NXDN repeaters together. Basic layer is Ethernet at some speed, at some throughput. Now, if it's wireless Ethernet, be it Wi-Fi, 2.4 or 5 gigahertz, or if it's from an LTE common carrier, you're kind of at the mercy, if you will, of the number of people that are also on the network or coming in through a particular site. Now, we've done a lot of research over the course of the last year, since last year's TECHCON, and for all of the boasting and the promotional things that you see in the media about 5G, I'm here to tell you that 5G is not necessarily all the things that the media and the carriers would like you to believe about it. Yes, 5G will help in the connection process when you take your phone or your computer or whatever IP device that you're trying to connect to that public network. It will allow more people on the network at a particular cell site. But that doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot if you haven't got the throughput, if you haven't got the bandwidth going into the site. All of the carriers, doesn't make any difference who, Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, or some of their offshoots, all of them have learned over the course of their 5G rollout that the bandwidth that they had going into the site during 3G and 4G just isn't enough anymore, because if you're going to have more people connect to the site through 5G, you've got to have the bandwidth available for them to do whatever it is they want to do, be it talk on the phone, do a push-to-talk with an LTE radio, and yes, those do exist, or do a file download, do a web search, even do voice over IP. If you haven't got the bandwidth, doesn't make any difference whether or not you can connect. You're just not going to go anywhere once you're connected, and you're going to get frustrated in a big way. Some of it also depends on the band that you're connected on. For example, if you're connected on band 2, which is at 1900 megahertz, it's a fairly wide band. Whereas some of the other bands, like band 66 at 2100 megahertz, doesn't have as much bandwidth and thus doesn't have as much throughput. And how you're connected to each site also makes a difference. With fiber, you've got virtually unlimited bandwidth, and it can be scaled up as needed. On the other hand, if your cell site is connected to another cell site via microwave, it's a limitation. That's one of the reasons why we've added more fiber optic capability to our connections, but it's not always available at some of our sites. Some of our repeater sites are actually quite rural. And so as a result, we do have a limitation of being able to connect only with a wireless connection with a finite amount of bandwidth. But where we've been able to go with a wired connection or a fiber connection, we have done it. And how that equates to throughput is lower latency, better resiliency, fewer network retries, which means a smoother, more fluent connection. One of the other things that we've also done is better network monitoring. It's really very discomforting when you go to do something and all of a sudden you find a site isn't up for whatever reason. And even though we've had some better networking tools that we're now working with, sometimes you just can't drill down to find that, well, maybe your entry point works, but the stuff behind the entry point doesn't. And that's one of the things that the VPN is going to allow us to do. We'll not only find out if we can make the connection through the router, through the LTE connection, whatever it happens to be, but we'll also now be able to directly address all of the IP connected equipment behind the router to see if it's actually on. Because we have had a couple of instances where, as an example, the router is powered one way, the repeaters and the amplifiers are powered another way. The router works, the repeaters don't. We had a situation happen not long ago, earlier this month as a matter of fact, with our Boyette site, where the local electric provider, the utility, had a major incident relatively early in the day. And I mean, when I say it was a major incident, at the site it blew out a 500 amp breaker. Takes a lot to do that. Well, a lot of things came back afterwards. A couple of things didn't. And we found out, but not until net time that evening, that the repeaters at that particular site were not working because it caused a hiccup with the power supply. Well, we'll have better visibility on that and to be able to monitor not only the connection, but to be able to monitor the things behind the connection in real time. One of the other network improvements that I alluded to a moment ago that we're going to be rolling out system-wide and will work on all talk groups as long as your radio has been reprogrammed to allow them to work, is beaconing. Now, what is beaconing? You know, normally you press push to talk, the repeater comes on, it's there for as long as your transmission, and then the repeater goes back down. Well, every time that the repeater is on, your radio has the ability to capture the signal strength coming from that repeater. It's called RSSI, Relative Signal Strength Indicator. And it's measured in dBm, If you've got a really great signal, your signal is somewhere between minus 55 and minus 60 dBm. If your signal's pretty good, you're probably between minus 80 and minus 90. And if your signal that you're receiving from the repeater, even though that audio still sounds crystal clear, is minus 110 to minus 115, well, then you're getting into the weeds. Your radio, if it is programmed to be able to digest that signal and do something with the RSSI, will not only receive the signal, decode the signal, because remember, we're transmitting zeros and ones, not analog voice, and audio will come out your radio. There's a feature that we're going to talk a little bit about this morning, but we're really going to delve into this afternoon during the afternoon session, called Vote Scan. And what Vote Scan, which is built into all of your ICOM NXDN radios, it's there. You just need to be able to turn it on and tweak the settings a little bit. It will do effectively what your cell phone does. Your cell phone, through the magic of being able to digest the signal strength from the nearest cell site or from a variety of cell sites, looks at the RSSI. It looks at those numbers and it says, this repeater here has got a minus 70, this repeater's got a minus 80, and that repeater over there has got a minus 100. So which one am I going to use if I've got to make a decision about which repeater to transmit on and which repeater to monitor? Well, as humans, we kind of look at the coverage map. We have some idea of where we are, maybe because we're mobile and we've got GPS in the vehicle, or we're at home and we just, we don't need GPS at that point. We just look at a map and say, okay, I'm here versus there's where the repeater is and that's what I sit on. And if you're mobile and as you're driving around or walking around or whatever the case happens to be, well, that signal strength is going to change. And maybe you're at a point as you're driving down the road where you're at a crossover between this repeater and this repeater. And as this repeater gets weaker, this repeater gets stronger. As humans, we have to make a decision depending upon our relative distance from this repeater to this repeater. When do I do the changeover? As an example, driving out here this morning from Pinellas County, at some point I needed to make a decision between when do I switch from the Seminole repeater, which is very close to where I live. In fact, it's on the same property. Where do I switch from Seminole to Boyette? Or do I switch at all? Because where I live, I get Seminole, I get Boyette, I get Pasco, and on a good day, I can even get into Verna from where I live, 47 air miles away. Seminole obviously is the best signal. Boyette, great signal. Pasco is a great signal. And Verna, if the winds are blowing out of the southeast, I get a great signal. Or if I'm using an outside antenna. Well, through the process of learning, observing, whatever, I know that if I get to a certain point as I'm driving east or north or south from my house, normally I don't go too far west because the Gulf of America is 3 miles west of me, so I'm limited there. But as I'm driving east and I'm driving toward Boyette, the signal's going to get stronger. If I'm going north, the signal from Pasco is going to get stronger. So at some point, I just reach over, press a button. My radio tells me when I'm on the Boyette memory channel in my radio, and life is good. Well, now I'm coming all the way out here to the Polk County EOC in Winter Haven, and I've got a decision to make. Do I stay with Boyette, which quite honestly I could? The Boyette repeater's coverage footprint is that good. Or do I switch over at some point to the more local, closer Bartow repeater, which is a lot closer to the EOC where we are today than the Boyette repeater? And if I choose to change channels, press the radio buttons a couple of times again, and voila, we're on Bartow. With vote scan and beaconing, each repeater will send out a short half-second RF burst every 10 seconds. So you'll see the little green light on your radio, which indicates a received signal, every 10 seconds, no matter what repeater you're on. The radio will then decide which repeater is better, which signal is better, and it will steer your radio automatically to the repeater that has the strongest signal. At that point, you don't have to precisely know where you're at or know where the crossovers are or where you can get 2 or 3 repeaters, because the radio, much like your cell phone, is going to do all of that for you. And again, if you're stationary, it's not a big deal, unless the repeater that you most frequently used for some reason isn't available. Maybe it's busy with another QSO that may be local to that repeater. Remember, if you're using Talk Group 1, which I know gets used a lot here in Polk County through the Bartow repeater, you may need to go to Boyette or to Verna or any of the other repeaters in order to talk on Talk Group 1200 or 1299. So, yeah, there is an application even if you're stationary, but the radio will make your decision for you unless you need to override, and of course, there is a way of doing that. So we're going to be talking more about beaconing and showing you how to enable that on your ICOM radios this afternoon. Now, end user radios. There's this great myth, and we've talked about this before, but there's this great myth that because NXDN is called a land mobile radio technology, it's not a quote-unquote ham radio technology. And if you go to the traditional ham stores, you won't be able to buy an NXDN radio, or at least not at the moment. And there's all kinds of marketing reasons for that, and technology reasons, and even some economic reasons. But just know that if you go to a DX Engineering, a Gigaparts, a ham radio outlet, and you want to buy an NXDN radio, they're probably going to say, what's that? We don't spell NXDN. They don't know about it because they're dealing with products from the ham radio side of their providers, be it ICOM, Kenwood, anybody else. So if you want to buy an NXDN radio, you're going to have to look for the individual manufacturer's land mobile radio or LMR dealers. And they're listed. Just go to your favorite website. You'll find out who the land mobile radio dealers are in your area. Now, in terms of the radios themselves, and for those of us here, and all of this, again, will be implemented with the live stream or the recorded stream that will be available in about 2 weeks. Our good friend Russ, N4RTD, is going to be adding these slides in, so you'll be able to actually look at the slides in detail. A lot of you have already discovered and use on a regular basis the ICOM F2100DS. It is a great radio. 128 memory channels, 5 watts, a display, and really good audio. Plus, if you go to the OTAA field, and if you don't know how to get there, we'll show you this afternoon, you can put your call sign in there and have it transmitted every time you press push to talk, which is an automatic way of meeting your FCC station identification obligations. And with the display, you've also got the ability to receive 100-character messages, such as what we can generate with Weather Message. Same thing with the F6130D mobile radio. And in fact, even though the radios came out at different times, and they do require different programming software because they came out during a transition between Windows 10, Windows 11, and ICOM decided to make some changes with the software that they use to write the programming software with. And there is some commonality. You can share the call list, but everything else has to be done a little bit differently. But they're basic radios, 128 memory channels, 8 zones, OTAA. Obviously, with a mobile radio, you have up to 45 watts, but you can also have as little as 5 watts. And I'll share with you a story in just a moment about why that's important as well. Now, if you want something that's a bit more expansive, there are more expansive radios with more features. And sometimes you may have the need to use one or more of these features. For example, the F4400 and the F6400 have a built-in GPS receiver. One of the things you can do on NXDN is send your GPS position. Much like your cell phone also sends out your GPS position, you can do this with NXDN. The 4400 and the 6400 also have a color display. It's bigger, it's easier to read, it processes some things a little bit differently than the displays on the 2100 and the 6130. One of the other things that both of these new radios also have is Bluetooth. So if you want to use a headset, or if in the case of yours truly here, where the ears just aren't what they used to be, you're wearing hearing aids now. Well, if your hearing aids are Bluetooth enabled, you may be able to get the radio to output its audio directly into your hearing aids. Way cool. Or if you're a user and you are in an environment where it's not advantageous to have your radio blaring for 50 other people to hear, you want your conversation to be somewhat private, run it in through a Bluetooth headset. Now, Bluetooth, for those of you who have not tried this, I know there are a couple of people who have, Bluetooth can also be used as a data transport. Here's a great example of how you can do that and where you can do that and why you would want to do that. Last year at Sun and Fun, which is our big EAA experimental aircraft air show, right down the street at Bartow International Airport, we had a situation where on one of the days there was severe weather. Well, how do you notify people of severe weather? How do you give them detail about it? How do you get their attention? Well, thanks to our good friend Russ, N4RTD, who was manning the ham station at Sun and Fun, Russ brought along a tablet computer and his F4400 radio, and instead of connecting the tablet to the radio with a cable, he used Bluetooth as the serial transport. And he was able to receive as well as transmit messages from his tablet to the radio, and then from the radio to anyone else out there on the network. And when the severe weather started approaching the airport, he was notified with colorized messages that sent a very clear message: severe thunderstorm warning, Polk County, until some time. That means it's time to go. It's time to pack things up. And it got the attention of a lot of people going like, well, I didn't know you could do that on amateur radio. Well, let me tell you, this isn't your father's amateur radio. And amateur radio is every bit as technologically advanced as many of the other communications technologies that we have today. One of the other things, too, that you can drop into either of these radios, and I've done it with both of mine, if you want to hear an example of it, come to our session this afternoon. You know, as you go from one channel to another, it goes 1, 2, 3. But as a human, you need to know what 1, 2, and 3 means. What is that memory channel? What does it connect me with? Well, when you put a 32 gigabyte SD RAM card into either of these radios, you can also do personalized, customized channel change announcements. And in the case of my 6400 in my vehicle, I can't see the display. And even if I could, I shouldn't look at it because I'm trying to drive the vehicle. And if I take my eyes off the road, well, that's a distraction. But I can reach over right next to me and press the channel change button, and it will tell me Florida, Bartow, Florida, Boyette, Florida, Charlotte East. And I know immediately I'm either on the channel I want to be on or I need to press the button again. And I don't have to take my eyes off the road. And the software that you need to create these channel change announcements, very inexpensive. The process is very easy to do. So that's one of the differences between the basic model and the advanced models. For those of you who may prefer a Kenwood radio to an ICOM, yes, Kenwood radios operating in conventional mode will interoperate with ICOM radios all day long. They will operate on the NI4CE NXDN system all day long, and even after dark. So if you've got a Kenwood radio, be it something that's basic like an NX800, something that's more advanced like an NX5300, it works. It may not necessarily have all of the features that an ICOM radio would, and one of the features that unfortunately you can't access with a Kenwood radio is the text messaging. While ICOM and Kenwood saw eye to eye on conventional voice, some of the other more advanced features under conventional operation, and texting is one of them, they went their separate ways. It's unfortunate, but that's life. We've tried to see if we can figure out a bridge so that a Kenwood can digest an ICOM-generated text message and vice versa, but we have yet to be able to get the cooperation of the manufacturers to be able to do that. Now, when it comes to programming, we're going to talk a little bit about software and about some of the things that we've already mentioned this morning. Weather message. We showed this last year here at TECHCON. Several of you are now running weather message. And when there is severe weather, you will see a display on weather message that's very similar to what's up on the screen behind me right now. We have colorized messages for special marine warnings, severe thunderstorm warnings, flood warnings, tornado warnings. So just by looking at this screen, we know that we've had a couple of severe thunderstorm warnings, as they're in red. We've had one tornado warning because it's in magenta, and a couple of special marine warnings that are in cyan. Without even looking at the textual detail, we know we've got some severe weather. But then you look at the textual detail and you find out what kind of a warning it is, who the warning is for, and what time it expires. Very cool. And all of this takes about a half second per message to transmit to you. So from a time consumed standpoint on the network, way more efficient than the National Weather Service in Ruskin has just issued a severe thunderstorm warning for name your county. So instead of taking 30 to 45 seconds, it's taking a half second. One of the other things that you can do with Weather Message, for those of you who may be into NTS messaging, there is a very dynamic and complete NTS message form that if you click on the Forms menu up on the top, you can select that, create your own NTS formal message, transmit it via NXDN in a lot less time than you can by going on the EagleNet tonight at 8:30 and delivering it by voice. And maybe more importantly, when the party that you're sending this message to, even if it's an intermediary, receives the message, they now have several options to get that message the next step down the line, and maybe all the way to the recipient. They can print it out and maybe send it as a PDF file via email. They can send it via NXDN even further down the line. And built into the NTS message form is the ability to actually send the completed message directly to the end user. And one of the data fields in the NTS message form is the ability to put in the end recipient's email address. So if you have people that are holed up in a shelter, they may not have any communications or very limited communications out of that shelter. If you're an ARES member and you're there to provide communication support, one of the things you can do is take Weather Message on a laptop or a tablet along with your NXDN radio and collect NTS messages, health and welfare messages that may need to go to a friend or a relative that's far removed from the disaster area. You collect that message. You can transmit it in real time, but if you can't, you can also store it on your computing device until such time as you can get to a location where you can send the messages. This receiving station then has the ability, again, to forward that message either via ham radio by voice, maybe it's on VHF or UHF, maybe it's on HF, or they can print the message out, send it as a PDF, or they can actually just take the message and transmit it directly to the end recipient. This is all about working smart. Weather Message at this point can be downloaded from the NI4CE website It is free of charge. We also regularly update the station list, because each of you who has an NXDN radio has gone out to radioid.net and you've gotten a 4 or 5 digit ID number. That is unique. We regularly update that because more and more people are getting into NXDN. And you'll notice in the station list on the left-hand side, there are a couple there that don't have their call sign listed because they had just gotten their ID and we hadn't done another dump from the radioid.net database. And oh, by the way, if you're doing a net on NXDN, even if you're not sending any messages out, the station heard list on the left-hand side of your weather message window is a great way to capture all of the stations that have just logged in. And you'll know they've logged in by voice because in the far right-hand column, there's a V there, whereas if they were sending a message and they are an actual weather message station, it would show a D as in data. So, great tool there. Now, we've talked about VoteScan and how you can make good use of the beaconing that we are going to be turning on here. In fact, I've already turned on 3 of the repeaters. The rest will come very shortly. In the very first item under memory channel, it says zone operation. So if you're programming the radio, and maybe you've got a conventional zone there already, like we have here on this example, but you now want to turn it into a voting zone without having to key input all of that information about memory channel, input frequency, output frequency, or what have you, because it's already there. If we go into each individual zone, you'll see that your memory channels have already been created. The talk groups have already been assigned. But now we want to make this zone a voting zone. It really is just uber simple, almost a no-brainer. You simply click on the field that says zone type, and you'll have a couple of options. The first one will be conventional. The last one will likely be voting. And by simply changing that conventional setting to voting and then writing that back into your radio, you will now find that that zone and the memory channels programmed there are programmed to make use of the beaconing. It's that simple. Not difficult at all. It's not the whole process, and as we go to this next slide, which for those of you who will be looking at this presentation after our good friend Russ has dubbed in all of these slides so that you can get a close-up, detailed look at them, there are several fields under Scan and VoteScan where it will be advantageous to change the default values that come automatically with the software. For example, we're recommending that for fast vote, you change that value to a -90. For vote L2, which is the next step down, a -110, and for revote, -114. That should work well for you system-wide. Now, if you happen to be in an area, and you don't do a lot of traveling, but if you happen to be in an area where maybe you want to be able to revote with RSSI levels that are a bit stronger than that, well, then you can make those changes accordingly. We also recommend that you turn fast vote on and revote after talk on. This will tell the radio that don't just take the RSSI value, let's also look at the activity that we're using the radio with and do a couple of things in addition to that. We'll get into this in more detail this afternoon. Here's one of my favorite subjects. We talk about it on our NXDN net on Wednesday nights at 7:30 on Talk Group 1200. Notice how I kind of snuck that free plug in there. But we're there every Wednesday night, and we want you to be there as well. But one of the things that happens when you're running a net, and I don't care if it's an analog net, an NXDN net, a DMR net, there's inevitably going to be a situation where two or more stations are going to try and check in at the same time. And I know it can be really frustrating if you're one of those and net control does not acknowledge you, because maybe your signal just wasn't as strong as the other stations, or worse yet, it was about the same and net control is now hearing nothing, because that's what happens with NXDN. If you have two or more stations transmitting at the same time, and particularly into the same repeater, you end up with the old Simon and Garfunkel sound of silence. Here's how you can beat the doubling and tripling. Notice that there is a column when you get into programming your zone called lockout. And what lockout simply does is, if it is set to busy, it means that if your radio is hearing something from the repeater already, or if you're on simplex, if there is a carrier out there, the radio prevents you from transmitting. So instead of getting the beep beep, like you normally do when you press push to talk, you get beep 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 beep. And if you keep doing this often enough, you'll figure out that the radio is trying to tell you, have a little patience. Let that first station out there get in, be acknowledged, and now it's your turn to try again. Busy lockout is also something that is very desirable for those of you who are into ARES and into emergency communications. It is a way to prevent you from stepping on somebody whose traffic may be more important than yours. Yeah, it takes the human element out of it a little bit, but it also teaches you radio patience. Finally, one of the other things, and we'll show you how to program all of this afternoon, is RX Group. And this is a very handy feature to have, because if you're using selective squelch, which means your radio's got to be able to decode the RAN code and the talk group, or the RAN code and the individual ID if you're trying to do a one-to-one conversation, you also want to be able to hear something more than the talk group that memory channel is programmed to. And we advocate, for instance, if you're in the Florida zone or the Skywarn zone or any of the other zones where it may be advantageous to get a broader picture of what's going on the repeater system, that you use RX Group to be able to decode multiple talk groups simultaneously. Yes, you can still only transmit on the talk group that your memory channel is programmed to, but if, let's say, you're on talk group 1200, Florida, and some traffic comes along on 1299, which is our Skywarn severe weather talk group, you want to be able to get that information without having to do anything else to your radio. It's called situational awareness. So we'll talk with you this afternoon about how to program those talk groups into your RX Group table, save it, and write it to your radio. It is a two-step process. Radio firmware, and I'm getting the hook here in just a moment. We want to cover this real quickly. If you have an F2100 radio, There is new firmware out. It was just released a couple of weeks ago. If you brought your radio with you today, I've got the firmware. We'll be happy to upgrade your radio. On the other hand, the firmware for the 6130s, the 4400s, the 6400s has been around a while. Doesn't look like there is a need to change it. So if you've got version 1.5 in your 6130 or version 3.3 in your 4400s or 6400s, you are up to date. So later today, we are going to be getting down into the weeds. We're going to get up there with some programming software, show you the programming tricks. If you're starting from scratch, programming your NXDN radio is a bit different than just programming, any other ham radio. We'll show you some of the things that you need to do to save yourself some time and a migraine headache. So with that, bring your questions to the afternoon session because we're just about out of time here. Or you can reach me at my email address, which is up here on the screen right now. Thank you very much for joining us this morning and for being part of the NXDN ham radio community here in West Central Florida. 73.